Hi guys, welcome to my kitchen. So it's almost Thanksgiving and I wanted to show you how to make a Thanksgiving classic, but making it from homemade. So that classic is green bean casserole. And this is something that actually I never grew up eating unless like maybe we were going to a family member's house or something, but normally we just had Thanksgivings ourselves, our small family, and we didn't really make green bean casserole. So when I got older, I realized that it's just a can of soup on top of a can of green beans with some onions on top. And I thought there has to be a way to make this better. So I started hosting my own Thanksgivings and I wanted to have it available because I know a lot of people are used to it, but I didn't want to just use a can of cream of mushroom soup. So this way is my way. It is a little bit more homemade, a little bit more authentic, and a lot tastier. So I hope that you might give this recipe a try this year instead of the traditional recipe. And if you do and you like it, please give me a comment after you do. So to get started with, I have my oven preheated to 350 degrees because we are going to pop this in the oven after we've got it done. So I have that preheating while we do the rest. Our temperature on our skillet here is going to be about a medium. And we are going to start off with 4 tablespoons of butter. You can use salted or unsalted, totally up to you. So we are just going to get that a little bit melty. I'm going to bring the heat up a little bit. And what we're going to be doing to start off with is sauteing a couple of ingredients together. So first I have some garlic cloves. It's 2 large garlic cloves. If your cloves are smaller, you could do about 3 or 4, just whatever looks good to you. And you want to go ahead and let those cook in that butter just until they start to get fragrant. And you will know what I mean by that once you've had them in there for about 20 seconds. They start to really bring out the garlicky smell, and it's really great. This is my favorite time to start adding seasonings as well. So I go ahead and add in some black pepper and some salt. Just go ahead and get that seasoning in there. And we're going to taste this before we finish it up, just to make sure the seasoning level is correct. So always go a little bit lighter than you think you need to on that. Alright, my garlic is fragrant now. I can smell it. And now I'm going to do my onion, which is just 1 large onion. Again, if they're small, you can do about 2 small onions. And we're just going to let this cook down a little bit. We're not going to give this a long cook, just a little. Just a couple seconds. We're softening it up, but it doesn't really need to come down to like a caramelized state or anything like that. But as it cooks, the longer it cooks, it just kind of like blends into the background of the sauce that we're going to be making. It's not a strong forefront flavor, but it gives it that background flavor. And with cooking, it's important to build on your flavors. So that's a lot of the reason that your recipes go in certain steps like this, like starting with the sauteing of your onions, because you're building your flavor levels. So that is what we're doing here. So my onions look like they're good now. They've reduced just a little bit. I mean a little bit because I've only been cooking while I've been talking to you. So they're just starting to soften up. I'm noticing that they're just a little bit smaller. So now I'm going to add in my mushrooms. This is about 8 ounces of mushrooms. So if you're buying them in the store, it would be about a regular container of mushrooms. Now I like to use the Baby Bella mushrooms. I don't know, for me they just seem a little bit fancier, a little bit nicer than the white mushrooms, but you can definitely use white. I know everybody's not into mushrooms, so you can cut the mushrooms out if you want to, but I will say that I have fed this to a couple people that don't like mushrooms and they liked it. It's not overpoweringly mushroomy. It's just a nice little bite in there. To that effect, I do like to keep my mushrooms fairly chunky, so they're not really small slices or a small dice, because I do like to get a good bite of mushroom in there. So while I'm cooking that down, I'm going to add in, I have three slices of thick sliced bacon that I'm adding in there as well. This is another optional ingredient. You do not have to add the bacon, it's just to add a little bit more flavor in there. Again, with the mushrooms, we are not going to cook them down a lot, because you can cook down mushrooms quite a bit and they get crunchy and they're really wonderful that way, but that isn't exactly what we want for this sauce. We want it to be a good little bite of mushroom. We want it to be cooked a little bit, but not overwhelmingly so. So now that I've had a chance for my bacon to get in there and marry in there, and my onions are cooked down pretty well, my mushrooms are starting to cook down a bit, we're going to take this off the heat. So I'm just going to take one of the bowls that I had my mushrooms and onions in, and I'm just going to go ahead and transfer this to that bowl, and we're just going to set it aside. So you can see how quick this is. It takes a little bit of prep time to chop everything, but it doesn't take a lot of time. So it's pretty quick and easy, really, once you get the hang of it. Now I'm going to turn my heat on again. Again, we're going to go low, and I'm going to use another 4 tablespoons of butter. So we're going to let that melt down a little bit. What we're doing here is we're creating a roux. And if you remember, about a week ago, I had posted a video on how to make a roux. And traditionally, you use the same amount of flour to fat. I am amending that just a little bit for this recipe, and I'll tell you why. So I have 4 tablespoons of butter here, correct? And I have 3 tablespoons of flour, which is 1 tablespoon shy of being an equal amount there. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want this to be a little bit thinner of a sauce than like my macaroni and cheese, what have you. So because I was using 4 tablespoons of butter and not just like a 2 tablespoon, I reduced the amount of flour a little bit to give us that. Okay. Now my roux is starting to come together and look good. It is a little bit thinner, but that's good. As I said, that's what we want in this situation. So I now have 2.5 cups, little baby cup, of half and half. Now with this step, you can choose what kind of dairy you'd like for it. You can do half and half like I'm doing today. You could do heavy cream. You could do light cream. You could also do milk, which milk would give you a little bit thinner of a resulting product. So you can use whatever you would like. Just don't go all the way down to something like a skim milk. I would say probably the thinnest you could go is a 1%. Anything less than that is just it's not gonna be the kind of sauce that you want it to be. And it's the holidays, so Christmas calories don't count, right? And that counts for Thanksgiving too, right? I hope so. Okay, so I turned my heat up just a little bit here while I'm incorporating in my heavy cream. I'm doing it slowly, as I mentioned on the macaroni and cheese video, because I want to get all the lumps out of my roux, and I also don't want to overpower the roux and then make it essentially not help with the thickening. So we're just slow as it goes here. Now in this, I'm gonna add another dose of my half and half. I'm also going to add in some Parmesan cheese. So the recipe calls for about half a cup. I never measure cheese. I just eyeball cheese. So I'm just kind of gonna eyeball it. It'll probably end up being about half a cup, but I don't know. Okay. So I'm gonna start mixing that in as well. And that's gonna add some saltiness also. So like I mentioned, you do want to be careful with your salt levels. So if you're using a salted butter, put less salt in it. If you are, if you've salted the water for your green beans, if you have salty Parmesan in there, salty bacon in there, be sure that you're tasting as you go so that you don't oversalt it. I have made oversalted food. It's not pleasant. You don't want to serve that to your guests. You will feel horrible, trust me. They're all nice and they're like, oh, no, it's fine. They just drink a lot of water and you're like, yeah, it's not fine. It's not fine. All right, so our sauce is starting to come together the way that it should. This step does take a couple minutes, but it is well worth it, I promise you. And it's well worth it if you're patient. And you can use the same pan that you use to saute your mushrooms and onions. Now also, I do have my green beans ready to go. I did go ahead and boil those ahead of time. They're right here, hanging out. And for those, I have about 2 pounds. Now, I always try to have more than I need, so I might use the whole 2 pounds, or I might use half of that, or I might use some of that. I can't math. So I always just try to have a little bit extra. I did go ahead and boil those down. Those are from fresh. I prefer to use the fresh anytime that I can. You can use a canned variety, you can use a frozen variety, but both of those are going to be a little bit waterier and not as sharp of a bite, like not as much snap to it. So I do recommend the fresh if you can find it, because it's just a little bit better. Also, I did salt the water for those so that they would maintain a little bit of that saltiness that was not coming from the sauce. So we're almost there. I'm going to add in a little bit more cheese. And after I've got this cheese incorporated, then I'm going to go ahead and add in my mushroom mixture again. And that's the point at which I am going to go ahead and give this a taste and see what the salt level is looking like. Also, tip for testing your green beans, because I just taught my husband this. So when you're boiling your green beans, if you are boiling them from fresh, you just need to put a little bit of water in there, about 1/4 of a cup or a little bit more. And then what you do is you go ahead and let that boil for about 7 to 10 minutes. And then you would test it not necessarily by tasting it, but by smelling it. So once the water comes to a boil, you put a top on it, a lid on it, and then you lift that up after your time's up and you smell it. And if it smells like green beans, then you know you're on your way there. And then your second test is how it looks. If they're a really vibrant green, like they're not a dull green, if they're a vibrant green, then they are pretty much where they need to be, and that's usually where I leave it. He did grab one and test it just to see. But I do kind of tend to err on the undercooked side for this particular dish because it's going to go in the oven for another 20 minutes. So it doesn't have to be completely cooked, but you don't want it completely raw. So you do want to have it pretty much at the right stage. But if you're going to go one way or the other, definitely undercook as opposed to overcooking. So we're going to taste our sauce now. pretty good, but it needs more salt. More salt and pepper. I find that often I am adding more salt and pepper than I added originally, but again, that's a good thing. That's the way that you want it to be. And you can see how nice and creamy that sauce is, how yummy that looks. I'm gonna dip it again. Okay, we're good. That's where it's supposed to be. So now, okay. Technically what you should do if you have a big enough pan for it, big enough pot for it, is pour that sauce over in the pot that you cooked these in. Hopefully you've drained them so you've taken all the water out. But I don't trust the size of my pot that I used today, so I'm just gonna do it this way. And pour it in my casserole. My casserole dish is not buttered or anything like that. It doesn't need to be, because the sauce is gonna go around and coat this. And yeah, it's got cheese in it, so it's gonna be a little bit gloopy, but it's not, like it's not gonna stick. So we'll just coat these. As I said, this would be easier in a pot. If I've taught you anything, hopefully it's to use the right sized pot for the dish, since I never seem to do that. Okay, lovely. And see, I really could have actually fit more green beans in there. So 2 pounds was actually a little bit shy. I probably should have had 2.5 pounds. So to finish this off with, I've got a little bit more cheese, because more cheese is great, right? So this is actually a blend of Parmesan and Romano and Asiago, and it's just in shavings. So what I added in, I could have used this same cheese for the sauce, but I just think that the shredded blends into the sauce a little bit quicker, more evenly maybe, and this stays a little bit more whole and more of a like cheesy bite when you get it. So I love to use the shaved for a topping, but the shredded for actually mixing into sauces. And then of course you can't really have green bean casserole without the classic fried onions. I have yet to figure out how to French fry my own onions, so I rely heavily on the store-bought for this application. But they're really good, so if it isn't broke, don't fix it, right?
Right.
All right, so that is nice and pretty and ready to go into our oven that, if you remember, is preheated to 350 degrees. That's going in there for 20 minutes. As long as you've cooked the beans properly, it's really just going in there to give it that extra ooey gooey little warmth thing going on. I will have you back here with me when we pull it out, so stay tuned. Hi guys, welcome back. So it's time to go ahead and pull out this green bean casserole, see what it looks like. Okay. All right, there we go. My husband just said it smells good. You can see how the cheese on the top melted down there, really nice. We've got the bubbly action on the sides, and those onions just got crisped up really nicely. You want to let this sit for about 10 minutes before you guys dig into it so it doesn't burn any mouths. But I promise you, this recipe is definitely a keeper. If you make this, you can't go back to the stuff out of the can. It's just so good. So I hope you guys like it, and I hope you have a happy Thanksgiving.